The so-called Motor Voter Act was signed into law by President Clinton back in 1993, and no state has misused it more than California. Since the Golden State allows illegals to get driver's licenses, those illegals can register to vote at the same time. So the question becomes, how badly will this corrupt the electoral process in the state of California? For more, let's welcome in Catherine Engelbrecht, president of True the Vote. She's Skyping in from Houston. And joining us from Newsmax, New York, Newsmax contributor John Fund. John, of course, also a columnist for National Review Online. John Fund, you have written extensively about voter fraud. Does this take the cake, what California is up to right now?
Oh, I think other things have been far worse. The complete abandonment of any restrictions on absentee balloting has probably had a bigger impact. California, and following Oregon's lead in doing this, though, has created a very curious enforcement problem. Because if you're automatically registered to vote when you renew or get a driver's license, that will include a lot of people who aren't citizens. Either they're here legally with resident status, or illegal aliens potentially. And we know this is a potential problem because a few years ago in Orange County, somebody had the clever idea of figuring out who said that they couldn't serve on a jury because they weren't a citizen, but at the same time is registered to vote and in some cases had voted. There were hundreds of cases in one close election, probably enough to make the difference in a congressional race a few years ago.
Catherine, let me turn to you. So many people talk about convenience in terms of voting. That was the so-called logic behind Motor Voter, saying, well, if you're registering in a new state or getting a driver's license, you kill two birds with one stone. What should be done to put safeguards in place, whether it's California or somewhere else? Or should there be a federal change in Motor Voter?
Well, you know, anytime you connect the feds with elections, you run into problems because they are at odds with ultimately the 10th Amendment and the states' rights to run their own elections. I firmly believe that the states need to be able to run elections and that the citizens of those states must stay engaged. And that's of course, that's what our whole organization is about, is getting people involved. And I think that what we're seeing now and where we continue to be headed is in a place that suggests that people really don't care enough to stand up and get involved in their own processes. And if they did, we wouldn't see things like what we're having right now in California.
John, you mentioned Oregon a second ago, and I'm interested because I thought during the last election, the people of Oregon, a state we think of as liberal, actually rose up against the registration of illegals, and yet the new governor came in after Kitzbauer left office, and she doubled down on enfranchising illegals. Is that basically what's happened in Oregon?
The current governor was before that the Secretary of State and was notorious for not enforcing election laws. You know, the excuse for these laws, JD, is always, well, voter turnout is so low, let's increase it. But look at all the things that California has done to try to increase voter turnout. It basically allowed anyone to vote absentee. You could even go on a permanent absentee list, which meant you automatically got a ballot in the mail, even though there were lots of security problems with that. Despite all of the efforts they've had in California, voter turnout in the last election was 42% of registered voters, an all-time low. If what they're doing is reducing voter turnout, why do they think what they're going to do next is going to increase it? I think the opposite could happen. People could lose confidence in the integrity of our elections, say, look, they're going to steal the election or manipulate the election anyway, why bother to vote? They could actually be driving people away from the polls.
So in other words, what's claimed to be electoral suppression can actually lead to depression among law-abiding citizens. So, Catherine, well said. We heard that from John Fund. Catherine, what, in your opinion, needs to be done? Or let me just ask this. I saw one article that illegals in California could basically give the presidential election to the Democrat nominee. They said Hillary Clinton. I don't know if she's going to win that. But is the lock there on California because of Motor Voter and all these actions there? About a minute left, Catherine.
Well, essentially, the answer to all of this is citizen engagement, and it's not enough just to vote. You have to work in the polls. You have to be engaged at all levels of the electoral process. You know, voting is a civil right, but with that right comes a responsibility. We've too long abdicated that responsibility, ceding it to the government. It's time to take it back. Once we do, and the power of the people is heard, then we can look forward to common sense election reform. But until then, the process is going to run amok, and if we just stand on the sidelines, it's not going to get any better.
Catherine Engelbrecht in Houston, John Fund in New York. We thank you both, and yes, we have a right to vote, but voting is a privilege, and moreover, it is a franchise, and we run the risk of profoundly damaging our country if there is not voter integrity. Thanks to you both. Coming up, the Bush campaign in critical condition, so will Jeb Care bring it back to life? Philip Stutz and Ed Pozzuoli discuss when Newsmax Prime continues, so stay with us.